Protocol.
Muy buenas tardes, siendo las 15 horas precisamente. Les saluda el profesor Cristian Cristóforo Capini, soy el coordinador de lengua inglesa del Instituto Superior de Lengua. Se da inicio a la defensa virtual de tesina acorde a la resolución 553/2020, que fija fecha y hora de la tesina con el título Gamification in the English Classroom, an action research on how it might impact on students' motivation and engagement, a cargo de los autores María, Nathalia, Figueredo, Camé y Fernando Esquivel, Vera, de la carrera de lengua inglesa del Instituto Superior de Lengua. En calidad de presidenta del examinador, nos acompaña la profesora Valentina Canete. Muy buenas tardes, profesora.
Buenas tardes, coordinador. ¿Cómo le va?
Muy bien, bienvenida. En calidad de miembros del tribunal examinador, las profesoras Romina Bento y Rosa Ortiz. Muy buenas tardes, profesora.
Buenas tardes.
Buenas tardes, profesor Cristóforo. ¿Cómo está usted?
Muy bien, bienvenidas, profesora. Postulantes universitarios, muy buenas tardes.
Muy buenas tardes, profesor.
Muy buenas tardes, profesor.
La profesora Valentina Canete, que usted entonces queda ahora en el manejo del desarrollo de la defensa.
Okay, good afternoon, Fernando, Natalia, and colleagues, Romina and Rosa, Professor Cristóforo. Thank you for being here for this great event. Fernando and Natalia, you have 30 minutes for your presentation. You can begin now.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. I'm going to share now. Is it available already?
Yes, we can see
Yeah.
it.
Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much for being here. We'll be presenting the results of our study, Gamification in the English Classroom, and action research on how it might impact on students' motivation and engagement. My name is Natalia Figueredo. I'm with my partner.
My name is Fernando Esquivel, Vera. Welcome to our presentation.
The first section is introduction, in which the statement of the problem is the lack of motivation and engagement in the English foreign language classroom. The implementation of gamification is an alternative that, if it's properly applied, can help to solve that problem. We also included enjoyment because it's a byproduct of motivation and engagement, and game-based learning was used as a point of comparison. The main purpose of this action research was to analyze how the implementation of gamification and game-based learning impact on students' motivation, engagement, and enjoyment.
The research objectives for this work were threefold. They set out to determine, identify, and analyze. The first objective is to determine the levels of student motivation, engagement, and enjoyment in a gamified class and a game-based learning class. The second objective is to identify the differences concerning motivation, engagement, and enjoyment between a gamified class and a game-based learning class. And the third objective is to analyze students' perception of a gamified class and a game-based learning class.
There were two research questions. The first one is, what are the differences regarding motivation, engagement, and enjoyment between a gamified environment and a game-based learning environment? The second question is, what is the perception students have of a gamified class and a game-based learning class?
The hypothesis for this work is the implementation of gamification in the language classroom improves students' motivation, engagement, and enjoyment compared to a game-based learning class.
Now we have the literature review section, which is divided in 4 parts. The first one has to do with gamification, which according to Carl M. Kapp is defined as using game mechanics, aesthetics, and game thinking to engage people, motivate action, promote learning, and solve problems. The next part is about game-based learning, which is a type of gameplay with defined learning outcomes, and it involves the use of gaming principles according to Tribus. There are some similarities between gamification and game-based learning because both are based on gaming principles, but there are also many differences. For instance, games or GBL activities are usually employed for a determined period of time. This means they have a clear beginning and a clear end. And in the case of gamification, it doesn't occur only at specific moments because it develops throughout the whole learning process. Another difference is that the purpose of a game is to amuse, while gamification's purpose is to motivate.
The third section of our literature review is themes. We have 3 themes: motivation, engagement, and enjoyment. The first theme, motivation, according to Mulvihill, is we have intrinsic and extrinsic motivation. Intrinsic motivation is doing something for the sake of personal satisfaction, while extrinsic motivation is doing something to get a reward or to avoid punishment. The second theme is engagement. According to Chernoff, engagement is the heightened simultaneous experience of concentration, interest, and enjoyment in the task at hand. Student engagement is a significant factor since it affects students' academic performance, social and emotional learning outcomes, and academic success. The third theme is enjoyment. In the words of Kapsner, enjoyment is thought of as an engagement in a challenging activity that either includes or results in a positive affective state. The fourth section is implementation. According to Guido, there are 4 steps for implementing gamification in a classroom. The first one is to understand students and context. The second one is to define learning goals. These were in line with the pedagogical requirements. The second one is to structure the gamified learning experience. This one came in the form of Q. And the fourth step is to apply gamification elements. These were the narrative, the rewards, the points, the competition, and the cooperation.
Now we move on to the methodology section. About the type of study, it was an action research, which is a variety of research methods designed to diagnose problems and help educators to develop solutions. We applied the technical scientific vision. It was also a mixed method approach because we worked with quantitative and qualitative data, and triangulation was applied to corroborate results and as a way to test the validity of the gathered data.
This work made use of variables. There were the independent and dependent variables. The independent variables are gamification and game-based learning, since they have an impact on the dependent variables, which are motivation, engagement, and enjoyment.
About setting and participants, the study took place in a private language institute located in Asunción. The population was a group of 28 students. They were teenagers from 14 to 17 years old with an intermediate level. The teacher in charge of the course had 6 years of experience working with students of all ages. This group was selected because it was the one in which the researchers had the possibility to apply and measure gamification. About data collection, there were 3 methods: survey, interviews, and class observations. The survey was given to the 28 students, and it was adapted from a study about gamification. It was designed to measure and compare the dependent and independent variables. The interviews were conducted with 13 students who were selected at random, and the main goal of these interviews was to understand more about students' perception on the use of these methodologies. Finally, class observations were conducted by one of the researchers who focused mainly on the dependent and independent variables.
The procedure for this work made use of the technical scientific vision. This model consists of a set of loop decisions to conceptualize and redefine. The sequential phases, according to Hernandez, are planning, identification of facts, analysis, implementation, and evaluation. Planning took place before classes started. The goal was to gamify a whole EFL classroom using multiple gamification frameworks. For this, we counted with an experienced teacher teaching the same level and using extensively GBL. All that it had to be done was the gamification effort that came in the form of the game Q. The second step is to identify facts. These were the settings and participants, the pedagogical requirements, the institute's methodology, and common issues in the classrooms like the lack of motivation and engagement. The third step is analysis. For this, an action research was to be conducted to see how gamification and GBL impact on motivation, engagement, and enjoyment. The fourth step is implementation. While GBL was used to introduce vocabulary, rehearse content, fix knowledge, and introduce new topic, gamification spanned the whole classroom and was used to aid with classroom management through the app Class Dojo, project-based learning, with project-based learning that were the challenges that students had to complete at the end of the course. Soft skills like critical thinking, growth mindset, and leadership. And the whole section on writing was also gamified. The fifth step is evaluation. Evaluation was ongoing in the form of class observations, and surveys and interviews were taken at the end of the course.
Concerning the data analysis, the first step was to analyze the results from the survey, and they are represented in tables. A student's t-test was applied, which is a type of inferential statistic used to determine if there's a significant difference between the means of two groups. And we also applied the standard deviation and the mean. The second step was to analyze the results from the interview. They were transcribed and coded into the main themes. And the last step was to analyze the class observations, who were analyzed focusing mainly on motivation, engagement, and enjoyment.
Now we are in the results chapter. This chapter will consolidate results from all three data sources into one of these three categories: motivation, engagement, and enjoyment. In each section, gamification and game-based learning will be compared to answer the research questions. Students were required to rate their experiences in order to measure their levels of motivation regarding gamification and game-based learning activities used during the course. The levels of motivation went from 1 to 5, 1 being the lowest and 5 being the most motivating. For 5, it was important for me to do well at this task. 8 said that for gamification and 8 for GBL. I would describe this activity as very interesting, 9 for gamification and 12 for GBL. I tried very hard to do well. I tried very hard on this activity, 7 for gamification and 3 for GBL. And I didn't try very hard to do well in this activity, 0 for gamification, 1 for GBL, and nobody said I didn't put much energy into this. In the graph, we see an upward trend of both methodologies, where we see a gap between items number 4 and 3. In the table, we see that the means are similar. Gamification's mean is 4, while GBL is 4.1, which means they both score, out of 5 points, they both score very high. And similarly, the GBL standard deviation is bigger than gamification's, which means that the spread is not the same. And the student's t-test critical value is 50%, which means that differences were not significant. Games are familiar to learners, so their motivation lies mainly on the element of fun. They know they're going to have fun, so that's where their motivation lies. On the other hand, with gamification, they manifested to try harder on this activity, so their motivation lies on the element of effort. In the interviews, students were asked to mention the factors that had the most impacts regarding their motivation. One factor that was mentioned several times was the interaction in the class. The students consider that a class with dynamics and games are very motivating. Also, communication was mentioned, since the students were able to communicate among each other. That gave them confidence and they participated more. Another element was competition. And the last one was challenges. The students were asked about the challenges they had to complete. One of them said, I like them very much. They motivated us to participate more. Class observations regarding motivation. Motivation with gamification was constant and increasing slowly, meaning that at the beginning, students weren't quite acquainted with the system, but when they got acquainted with it, they showed more participation and more enthusiasm. While GBL motivation is oscillatory and not constant, meaning that games have a clear beginning and end, and not all games impact the same way.
Now we have the results about engagement. We have the results from the survey in which students were required to rate their experiences regarding engagement and gamification and game-based learning. For this statement, I wanted to explore all the options because it was very challenging. 13 students said that about gamification and 5 about GBL. I felt that time passed quickly. 4 for gamification, 12 for GBL. I wanted to complete the game. 5 for gamification, 1 for GBL. I did not care how the game ended. 2 for gamification, 2 for GBL. I feel bored when playing it. Only 1 for GBL. And here we have the graph with the result from the table, and we can see the gaps in the items number 5 and number 4. We have the table comparing the mean, standard deviation, and students' t-test. The mean for gamification is 4.2, and for GBL it's 3.4, which shows a higher level of engagement in the case of gamification. The standard deviation levels are very similar, 4.97 for gamification and 4.66 for GBL. And the students' t-test critical value is 42%, which means that there is not a significant difference because this value should be smaller than 5%. So here we can notice how the element of challenge played an important role because in the case of games or GBL activities, they usually do not represent a challenge for students because they know what to expect and they are familiar with them. But in the case of gamification, it was a different system with different procedures. There were many aspects to be explored, and their performance had an impact on their results. So all of that could have influence on their engagement. About the interviews, all the students emphasized the use of games in the class. One of the students even mentioned that games were their favorite part of the lessons. They also highlighted the element of rewards, the use of coins, because they serve as motivators to participate in the activities. And they were pleased with the implementation of technology, since they used an application and for them it was more practical. About class observations and gamification. In this system, points played an important role, and students were aware of that. When an activity was linked to the use of hoop or the coin system and rewards, those were the moments in which the levels of engagement were higher and students were more concentrated on the activities because they were challenging enough to catch their attention. Besides, the students were aware of the impact their behavior and performance had on the final results. In the case of GBL, when these activities were introduced in the lessons, students were very enthusiastic. They were willing to participate, and most of them participated. It is important to remark that these games usually did not have points, so they didn't affect their progress or grades.
Results about enjoyment. Students were required to rate their experiences in order to measure their levels of enjoyment regarding gamification and game-based learning activities used in the course. For statement number 5, I feel genuinely 5, 8 for gamification, 11 for GBL. Statement number 4, I feel happy when playing the game, 9 for gamification, 7 for GBL. 3, I feel that it's great for killing time productively, 5 for gamification, 6 for GBL. I feel exhausted when playing it, 2 for gamification, 0 for GBL. And nobody said, I feel miserable when playing it. In the graph, we see an upward trend of both methodologies where GBL reaches a higher peak. In the indexes, we see that GBL's mean is bigger than gamification by 0.2, which is very little. And they both score very high, meaning they were both enjoyable for students. GBL standard deviation is bigger than gamification, which means the spread is not the same. And the students' t-test critical value is of 50%, which means that differences were not significant. Cool, which is gamification in this study, is a system with structures and rules that encompass the whole classroom. It does not have a beginning or end during the lessons, but it develops along with them. On the contrary, traditional games, students are used to them. Despite these main differences, they both show similar levels of enjoyment.
About the interviews, all the students who participated said that the interviews were quite interactive. One of the learners expressed that it was one of the most interactive courses he ever had in the institute. They highlighted the element of collaboration, and this is due to the social dimension of games, because collaboration and teamwork is required, and they were also able to keep track of their scores. About class observations and gamification. It was a little bit more difficult to observe enjoyment in the case of gamification because, as we mentioned before, it doesn't occur only at specific moments because it's an ongoing process. But this situation is very similar to what happened with engagement. When an activity was linked to coup or the use of coins and rewards, those were the moments in which the levels of enjoyment were higher, and students were also more concentrated on their tasks. About GBL, when these activities were introduced, students really had fun. It was easier to observe enjoyment, and most of them participated. It was also observed that they felt comfortable playing these games, which means they are familiar with them. Fernando? He stopped.
Podemos dar un pequeño tiempo hasta que
I'm going to text him.
va a salir o va a entrar otra vez. Sí. Valentina, tu micrófono.
Sorry, you still have a slide or two to go, right, Natalia?
Yes.
Because you stopped presenting, right?
Yes, because he was supposed to talk and then I didn't listen to him. Because when I present, I cannot see anyone.
Mm-hmm.
So I didn't know what happened.
No, he froze. So hopefully he'll be back and we will continue with his part. Let's see on the WhatsApp if he put something in there. There's nothing on the group.
And now Natalia left the meeting.
Let's see if, let's wait a couple of minutes. Let's see, I put something on the group. Is someone back? I think someone's back, right? Natalia's back.
Mm-hmm. So maybe he can use his phone to, normally phone signals are better than computer. If Natalia has the presentation?
Yes, he can
I
connect.
talked to him and he lost the connection. He's gonna try to connect with his phone now.
Yeah.
Yes.
He was having problems with his internet this morning and then it came back, but now it has problems again.
No, he is back. I just admitted him. I cannot sit there. There you are. Microphone. Fernando.
You can turn him on.
Turn on your microphone first.
I can do it.
Turn on your microphone.
There.
Okay.
Okay. Should I continue?
Yes, please.
Sorry for that.
That's okay.
No worries. There you go.
Now we reach the conclusions chapters. This is the last chapter where we try to answer the research questions, state the implications of this work, and give recommendations for future studies. The first research question is, what are the differences regarding motivation, engagement, and enjoyment between a gamified environment and a game-based learning environment? In the case of motivation, both methodologies share similar levels. However, some differences were observed when it comes to the moments and length during which gamification was noticeable. About engagement, gamification showed higher levels in comparison to game-based learning. Gamified activities kept students engaged for a longer time. Regarding enjoyment, both methodologies shared similar levels. It was more difficult to observe enjoyment in the gamified activities than in the game-based learning activities.
The second question was about the perception students have of a gamified class and a game-based learning class. Based on the results, both methodologies reached high scores in the survey, which means students have a favorable perception. The interviews and class observations can confirm these results. The rewards and incentives were motivating for students. The narrative was very interesting, so it kept them engaged, and there was a lot of collaboration, and students had the opportunity to interact with their classmates. So in overall, their perception was quite positive. The hypothesis stated that the implementation of gamification in the language classroom improved students' motivation, engagement, and enjoyment compared to a game-based learning class. The quantitative results show that the levels of motivation, engagement, and enjoyment are very similar in both methodologies, and the students' test showed that differences were not really significant. However, the qualitative results demonstrated that gamification and game-based learning impact these areas in different ways. So this means that they do share similar levels, but they work differently.
The main purpose of this study set out to analyze how the implementation of gamification and game-based learning impact on learners' motivation, engagement, and enjoyment. Gamification and game-based learning impact positively on the three mentioned areas. Both methodologies can help to improve motivation, engagement, and enjoyment in the classroom. They can also be combined and adapted.
About the implications, the implementation of gamification implies a deeper understanding of motivation, engagement, and the factors that motivate students. A major implication is in classroom management because it becomes more democratic. Another implication is the shift of focus of the class from the teacher to the students. It's more student-centered and the teacher becomes a facilitator. A downside is the amount of work because it might require more planning and preparation, but in return, teachers get a deeper understanding on class dynamics and how motivation works. About the challenges, the gamification practitioner is always challenged. That's why creativity should be the main tool to overcome the obstacles that can appear in order to empower learners and give them the ownership of their own learning.
The first recommendation for future studies is different uses for GBL and gamification in different contexts. For instance, not only to teach English, but to teach sciences, math, or any other subject. And there are also, of course, applications for companies and other areas. The second recommendation has to do with, since gamification is the adding of game elements into non-game context, future studies could focus on what game elements contribute the most to the efficiency of the methodology. And the third recommendation is that other studies could focus on cognitive abilities, such as retention and rates of learning. Now we have reached the end of our presentation. Thank you very much for joining us. And if you have any question, we'll be glad to answer them.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Fernando and Natalia. That was a very good presentation. I would like to give Professor Romina Bento the microphone now to ask a question if she has one.
Well, first of all, guys, I think it's probably the first time that I see inferential statistics in a language study, because After all, your study is based on language practices and language teaching. So congratulations on your daring to go where nobody else has gone before. That's to start with. And I have a quick question. Approximately how old was the teacher who implemented these methods in his or her class?
It was Fernando.
Exactly. 37. 37 today, 38 tomorrow.
Ooh, about to turn older. Okay, now, listen to me. Do you think that the results would be affected if the teacher were older and less experienced in teaching methods?
Certainly. Since
How would that impact the results of your study?
well, since I think you have to be a thorough teacher to be able to go through all the variables that were in place, because you not only have the pedagogical requirements that were already in place, so normal lessons had to be taught, they had to be taught according to the institute's methodology, and on top of that, you have to apply game-based learning, which is, we use a lot of that, and then gamification. And for the gamification was a real brainy work, because I had the intuition that I had to come with something that I felt comfortable sharing and I felt comfortable pitching, and that's how the idea came. Does that answer the question?
Yes, it does. It does. And Nati, another question for you, since Fernando was the one responsible for the action part of the study. This study was conducted in teenagers, and you know how teenagers react to games and to anything that catches their attention and when they are really engaged. Now, do you think it would render the same results in an adult class, for example?
I think the results can vary, but in my experience, adults also like games. It can be that teenagers are more energetic and they are willing to participate, and maybe adults, I don't know, because they came with that system in which they study, they sit down, they listen to the teacher. So it's going to be more difficult to make that change. Teenagers are kind of used to it. Not so much maybe, but they are more used to it. And with adults, it's going to be a little bit more difficult. And maybe the results are not going to be exactly the same, but I think we're going to have good results anyway.
That should be interesting to watch. Well, Professor Canese, that's all for me. I have made my two questions. Maybe Mrs. Ortiz would like to ask something else.
Yes, thank you. Ms. Ortiz, could you please go ahead and ask your questions if you had some for them?
Yes. So first of all, congratulations. I really like your research, and I thought it was very interesting considering all the new methodologies that we need to implement now. And I wanted to ask you, how much time did it take you to plan a gamified activity or class?
One activity or the whole gamification?
The whole gamification class or one activity? Like if it took you long or not?
It depends. It depends, because we had to do it a little bit faster because we did it last year actually. So as Fernando mentioned, we had all the lesson plans. So what we had to do was gamify. And as we mentioned also in the applications, it takes a lot of time because you have to research about it, you have to select your activities. And we also applied COOP, and Fernando can talk more about it. And we applied COOP, which is the narrative. there you go. So yeah, it takes time, but it's worth it.
It was actually 8 months in the making, because we, at the beginning, we foresaw a control group that when we sat down and started narrowing down, we didn't go that path anymore. But so it was a 4 months of preparation with one group that we used extensively, GBL, and we knew we wanted to gamify. But then it came the reunions with brainstorming on how are we going to gamify this. So we gamified, gamified a bunch of elements in the classroom, like soft skills was gamified. The whole lesson was gamified. Game-based learning in a way was gamified because when students completed, I didn't give them treats or cookies or candy. I gave them coins every time, and they had fun with it. So it was a long process, but very insightful. We learned a lot from it.
Yeah, and it also depends on what aspects you want to gamify and what are your objectives.
Yeah.
But do you think, for example, this year you already gamified a lot of activities, so do you think it would be easier, for example, to implement that next year? Or,
Yeah.
And so it is like a lot of work for the first time, but then it is easier to continue using the same activities later.
Exactly. It's a lot of work the first time, but then it becomes easier because you get used to it and you know how to do it. And of course, you have to update yourself, but you have this structure already.
Yeah, and I would recommend that for a first step, you try using the application Class Dojo or any other gamification app that is out there that suits the needs of your group.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Rosa. She actually stole one of my questions, which is fine. I was just going to ask Fernando and Nati if you would continue using gamification in your lessons after this experiment.
I wasn't. I got a higher level then, and it was like a lot of content, but one student skipped one term, and from my action group, and he was like, "Teacher, are we going to do gamification? Are we going to play cool? Are we going to use Class Dojo?" And I was like, "Okay, I'm not prepared to use it now, but since you asked, okay, so I think I'm gonna use it in the future. No problem. Yes, for sure.
I will definitely use it. Unfortunately, I can't apply it the place that I work at right now because they have their methodology and we can't implement other methodologies. But if I work at another place, yes, I will. I used to do it before. I didn't know that it was gamification, but it was similar to gamification.
Well, and then one other question. If you had to do a follow-up study, something for your, let's say, your master thesis, how would you do it and what would you focus on?
I would focus on rates of learning and cognitive abilities that we also wanted and meant to do, but the differences were not significant because we only measure the test, the control group's test and the action group test, and the differences were not, and from their averages from one class to the next. So I think you have to do a specialized testing to get those results to see in rates of learning. I have no idea actually how to test that, but it'd be nice to try it.
Yes,
what
and
about you, Nata?
I would like to study about the relationship between gamification and the impact it has on the brain, because I would like to make a master in education and neuroscience. So I think it's going to be interesting to learn more about that. And Fernando, I think Fernando researched about that for linguistics, neurolinguistics, right? Gamification and the brain.
Yes, there's a nice link between gamification and health sciences. Since they improve cognitive abilities, they want to tackle that to like certain areas of the brain. So it's very groundbreaking work, and with machines that are responsive to your brain. Not only the machine is stimulating your brain while you're playing it, but the messages from your brain also moves the game somehow. So it's very groundbreaking thing.
Yes, well, thank you very much. I don't have any more questions. I'd like to again congratulate you. When they came to me with their topic, I thought it was a great topic. We did have another gamification thesis priorly, but the idea that they had was, the way I had thought that it should be done. So I really enjoyed seeing you go through the whole process. And the result is also, even though, you know, you didn't find like significant differences between one and the other treatment, but that's also because game-based learning is also something that is motivating. So, so you do have some really good experience, and your recommendations for teachers and for researchers are very, I think, appropriate. And I encourage you to continue going along this path, continue learning and continue studying, because this is really interesting and really encouraging to all of us to try it out. Because like Romina said, some of us probably don't want to do it because it's very time consuming, and gamifying a whole university class might involve like a whole semester preparing to do that. And some of us lead really hectic lives and think that, you know, we might not have the time to invest in that, but maybe we should, because it might be worth it. So thank you very much for a great presentation. And now you can leave the room so that we can deliberate, and Mr. Christopher will let you know when you are free to come back, and we'll give you your results. Okay?
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. See you.
So they're back.
Yeah.
So Natalia and Fernando, congratulations. You are now licenciados. You have a birthday present, Fernando. You got a 5. We all agree that you did a very good job. So congratulations on an excellent job. We really encourage you to continue. Like I said previously, working on this, learning more, and always keeping up with the new things, and being good teachers. Thank you very much. And I don't know, Mr. Christopher, if you have anything else. I mean, I think I have to tell you this. Is there anything that you guys would like to say before we go?
I just want to thank...
Thank you. Yes, talk, Fernando, and then...
Yeah, I would like to thank our tutor for narrowing down our work, our advisor for the awesome statistics that we got, and our methodology teacher for putting us in the right path, and also our family and friends, of course.
Yes, and I would like to thank you all, because you were our professors and you had an impact on us. You are really amazing professors. I would like to say that, and I'm being honest, really. You are great professors, and thank you for everything. Thank you, Professor Canessa, for your advice during the whole process.
You're welcome. It was a pleasure helping you guys. I was telling them how it's nice to have students like you who are driven and perseverant and disciplined. So it's really satisfactory for us to be in a defense like this one. So thank you guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
I'll give official closure now in Spanish, and then we can continue. Damos por terminada entonces la defensa de tesis de los recién graduados, Natalia Figueredo y Sebastián Esquivel, nuestros nuevos colegas. Felicidades.
Fernando Esquivel.
Fernando.
It comes with my brothers. But it's good. Thank you very much.